Imagine a civilization so advanced it built some of the world's first planned cities with sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights, and mysterious seals, yet left behind no decipherable writing, no royal tombs, and no clear evidence of rulers or armies. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, a society that flourished over 4,000 years ago across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, rivaling ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia in its complexity and reach. Yet despite its monumental achievements, this remarkable culture remains one of history's greatest enigmas, a puzzle that has captivated archaeologists, historians, and curious minds for generations. What makes the Indus Valley so endlessly fascinating is not just what we know, but all that we don't. Here was a society that mastered urban planning, trade, and craftsmanship on an astonishing scale, yet seemingly avoided the grand monuments, temples, and palaces we associate with other ancient powers. Their cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, reveal a people who valued order, hygiene, and community, but whose beliefs, language, and ultimate fate remain locked away, hidden beneath layers of earth and time. It's as if they left us a beautifully intricate clock but took away the key to wind it, leaving us to wonder how it ever ticked in the first place. In this video, we're embarking on a journey to uncover 25 of the most puzzling mysteries of the Indus Valley Civilization, questions that continue to challenge everything we think we know about the ancient world. From their undeciphered script to their sudden disappearance, from the purpose of their intricate seals to the startling absence of obvious temples or fortifications, each mystery pulls us deeper into the story of a people whose legacy is as profound as it is perplexing. You're about to explore a lost world where every discovery seems to raise more questions than answers, and where the echoes of an extraordinary society still whisper secrets waiting to be heard. And so we begin with perhaps the most famous and enduring of all the Indus Valley enigmas, their script. Across thousands of small stone seals, pottery fragments, and copper tablets, the people of this civilization left behind a written language that is utterly unique. We have examples of it, but we cannot read a single word. This isn't a matter of finding a few broken sentences. We have a corpus of text, yet it remains as silent and impenetrable as the day it was discovered. What makes this script so incredibly difficult to crack? For starters, the texts are astonishingly short. The average inscription contains only 4 or 5 symbols, and the longest one ever found has just 26. This is a far cry from the Rosetta Stone, which provided a lengthy decree in 3 different languages. Without a longer, bilingual text to use as a key, linguists are essentially trying to solve a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. The script itself is also a complete isolate. It doesn't appear to be related to any other known writing system, ancient or modern. It's not pictographic like early Egyptian hieroglyphs, and it doesn't seem to be a straightforward alphabet either. Most experts believe it's a logo-syllabic script where some symbols represent whole words or concepts, while others represent sounds. But without knowing the underlying language it represents, this is largely an educated guess. The quest to decipher it reads like a history of brilliant yet frustrated minds. Over the decades, countless attempts have been made. Some proposed it was an early form of Sanskrit, linking it to the Vedic traditions that came later. Others saw Dravidian, the language family of South India, as a more likely candidate. There have been claims of successful decipherment, but none have gained widespread acceptance within the academic community. The proposals often contradict each other wildly, with one scholar declaring a seal reads the name of a king, while another insists it's a prayer to a god, and a third argues it's simply a merchant's inventory tag. This lack of consensus highlights the fundamental problem. Without a key, any decipherment is built on a tower of assumptions. The very purpose of the writing is another layer of the mystery. Was it a full-fledged language used for literature and royal proclamations? Or was it a more limited, functional script used primarily by merchants and artisans for labeling goods and recording transactions? The fact that it appears most frequently on small seals used for stamping clay tags on trade bundles suggests a commercial application. But this doesn't preclude a richer, more complex use on perishable materials like palm leaves or wooden boards, which would have crumbled to dust millennia ago. We are likely only seeing a tiny, durable fraction of what may have once existed. This undeciphered script is the locked door to the entire Indus Valley Civilization. Behind it could lie their history, their myths, their laws, their names, the very sound of their voices. Until we find the key, we are left staring at an elegant but silent code, a 4,000-year-old whisper that we strain but fail to hear. If the silent script is the locked door to their minds, then the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro is a window into their public soul. Rising from the city's highest mound, this structure is one of the most arresting and sophisticated achievements of the entire ancient world. Picture a vast, rectangular swimming pool, meticulously built from finely baked bricks and sealed with a layer of natural tar to make it completely waterproof. Staircases at either end lead down into the bath, and surrounding it are rows of small rooms and a complex network of channels for filling and draining the water. The engineering is so precise, so deliberate, that it immediately signals this was far more than just a place to get clean. This was a centerpiece of the city, and its purpose remains a captivating debate. The most prominent theory is that the Great Bath was the heart of religious or ritual life. In this view, it wasn't for bathing in the everyday sense, but for ceremonial purification. Water, across countless cultures, is a universal symbol of spiritual cleansing, of washing away impurity and preparing oneself to commune with the divine. The bath's secluded location on the citadel, away from the bustling lower city, suggests exclusivity and importance. The surrounding rooms could have been used by priests or initiates to prepare for rituals, perhaps involving sacred oils or changing into special garments. If this theory holds, then the Great Bath might be our clearest evidence of an organized spiritual belief system in the Indus Valley, a place where the community's relationship with the gods was literally immersion-based. Yet, not all scholars are convinced it was solely a sacred space. An equally compelling argument paints it as an advanced public utility, an early masterpiece of civic engineering and social planning. The Indus Valley people demonstrated an unparalleled concern for water management and hygiene, with nearly every house featuring its own bathing area and a direct connection to a city-wide drainage system. The Great Bath could be the grand communal extension of this value, a public swimming pool or a centralized bathhouse for the elite citizens living on the citadel. It would have been a place for social gathering, for relaxation, and for maintaining the high standards of cleanliness that seemingly defined their urban life. This interpretation frames the Indus people as pragmatic pioneers of public health, whose communal investments were as practical as they were impressive. And then there are the possibilities that stretch our imagination even further. Could it have served a dual purpose, functioning as both a civic utility and a ritual space depending on the season or occasion? Was it part of an elaborate astronomical observatory, its still waters reflecting the heavens for priests to study? Or did it play a role in initiation rites or coming-of-age ceremonies, a physical trial that every young person had to undergo? The absence of any explicit depictions or inscriptions means we are left interpreting the architecture itself, and architecture can be wonderfully ambiguous. The Great Bath stands as a silent, water-filled vessel. We can describe its bricks and tar with perfect accuracy, but we cannot see the people who gathered there. We don't know if its waters were stirred by solemn prayers or the laughter of children. It embodies the central paradox of the Indus Valley, a civilization that built with such stunning clarity, but whose motivations and beliefs remain shrouded in a mist that even the most advanced archaeology has yet to clear. Just as the Great Bath invites us to wonder about their daily lives, the ultimate fate of the Indus Valley people presents perhaps the most dramatic puzzle of all. Around 1900 BC, this vast, sophisticated civilization began to unravel. The great cities, once bustling centers of trade and industry, were slowly, systematically abandoned. This wasn't a single, overnight catastrophe that felled every settlement at once, but a gradual yet undeniable fading away, a decline so complete that knowledge of these immense cities vanished from human memory for over 3,500 years. So what could possibly cause such an advanced society to simply give up on its greatest achievements? The most enduring theory points to a dramatic shift in the environment, specifically the life-giving rivers that were the civilization's arteries. The Indus Valley Civilization was built on the bounty of the Indus River and its tributaries, like the ancient and now lost Ghaggar-Hakra river system. Evidence suggests these waterways began to shift their courses, a common phenomenon in the flat plains of the region. A major river changing its path would have been catastrophic. It could have turned fertile farmlands into barren desert, starving the cities of their food supply. It could have disrupted the intricate trade networks that were the economy's lifeblood. Or it could have brought devastating, uncontrollable floods that repeatedly inundated the meticulously planned streets of cities like Mohenjo-daro, forcing people to constantly rebuild until they finally surrendered to the water's will. This theory of climate change and river shift paints a picture of a civilization beaten not by invaders, but by a changing planet it could no longer adapt to. Yet, for a long time, the popular narrative told a different story, one of violent conquest. This is the Aryan invasion theory, which proposed that waves of nomadic tribes from the steppes of Central Asia, speaking an early form of Sanskrit, swept down into the subcontinent. This theory was largely built on later Vedic texts that describe clashes with walled cities and dark-skinned people, interpreted by some as a memory of this conquest. The apparent lack of evidence for massive warfare in Indus cities was explained away by suggesting these invaders were so overwhelming that the urban centers collapsed without a significant fight. However, this theory has fallen out of favor with most modern archaeologists. There is a stark absence of mass graves, layers of ash from burned cities, or weapons scattered among the ruins that would clearly indicate a violent overthrow. While migration likely occurred, the evidence no longer supports a swift, genocidal invasion as the primary cause of collapse. This has led researchers to explore more complex and sinister possibilities. What if the people weren't conquered, but were instead silently defeated by an invisible enemy? Disease, perhaps in the form of a horrific epidemic or a prolonged malaria outbreak fueled by changing water patterns, could have decimated the population. A plague wouldn't leave behind clear archaeological evidence like weapons do, but it could cripple a society far more effectively than any army, destroying the labor force, fracturing social order, and creating such terror that cities were abandoned as cursed places. Perhaps the most compelling modern explanation is that it wasn't one single disaster, but a perfect storm of interconnected crises. Imagine a series of prolonged droughts induced by climate change, weakening agricultural output. This food stress would make the population more vulnerable to disease. At the same time, the very rivers that sustained trade began to shift, strangling the economic networks that held the civilization together. This combination of environmental and economic pressures could have caused an internal social breakdown. The meticulous order that defined the Indus Valley for centuries may have simply fractured. People might have lost faith in their leaders and their systems, choosing to abandon the grand cities for a simpler, more sustainable life in smaller villages elsewhere. This theory suggests the civilization didn't so much die as it dissolved, its people migrating and gradually assimilating into other cultures, taking their secrets with them but leaving their empty, echoing cities as a monument to a world that was no longer sustainable. The truth likely lies in this messy, complex combination of factors, a slow-motion unraveling where environmental change triggered social and economic collapse, leaving no single villain to blame, but a multitude of pressures that ultimately proved too great for even this remarkably resilient society to withstand. This absence of grandiosity is one of the most defining and puzzling features that sets the Indus Valley apart from its famous contemporaries. While the Egyptians were raising pyramids to the sky and the Mesopotamians were constructing towering ziggurats and vast royal palaces, the people of the Indus were investing their incredible architectural skill in something entirely different: civic infrastructure. There is no evidence of a massive tomb for a mighty pharaoh, no grand temple complex dedicated to a pantheon of gods, and no fortified palace proclaiming the absolute power of a king. This presents a profound historical riddle. How could a civilization so advanced, so organized, and capable of building entire cities from scratch seemingly lack the most universal symbol of ancient power, the monumental statement building? This architectural choice forces us to reconsider what power and authority might have looked like for them. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, the social structure was a steep pyramid with a god-king or a powerful priestly elite at the very top. Their immense wealth and absolute control are physically manifested in the stones of their colossal projects, which were built by vast labor forces commanded from above. The Indus Valley suggests a different model altogether. The uniformity of their brick sizes, the standardization of their city layouts, and the emphasis on shared amenities like wells and drainage systems point towards a society that valued collective well-being over individual glorification. Power may have been more distributed, perhaps held by a council of elders, a group of leading merchants, or a class of administrators who organized trade and resources without claiming divine status. Their authority wasn't stamped on the landscape with a giant palace. It was embedded in the efficient functioning of the city itself. The grid of streets and the flow of clean water were their monument. This doesn't mean there was no hierarchy. The very fact that these cities were so well planned indicates a powerful central authority capable of enforcing building codes and organizing labor. The presence of a distinct citadel area raised above the rest of the city in places like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa clearly indicates a spatial separation, likely for a more elite or influential segment of the population. But what did they do up there? The structures on the citadel, like the famous Great Bath and the so-called granary, were large and important, but they were fundamentally public or functional spaces. They don't appear to be personal residences for an all-powerful ruler. This suggests that elite status might have been tied to control over ritual, trade, or storage of surplus grain, economic and religious power, rather than purely political or military dominance. The challenge for archaeologists is that this lack of obvious royal imagery makes it incredibly difficult to identify who was in charge. Without statues of kings adorned with crowns, without tombs filled with riches that signify rank, and without palaces filled with the artifacts of courtly life, we are left guessing. Were their leaders so secure in their power that they felt no need to build lasting monuments to themselves? Or was their culture's world so distinct that the very concept of a deified ruler was alien to them? Perhaps their greatest expressions of power were not meant to be carved in stone, but were instead performed in rituals, enacted through control of trade networks, or demonstrated in the ability to provide a stable, hygienic life for thousands of citizens. In the Indus Valley, the greatest symbol of power might not have been a pyramid, but a functioning sewer. This makes their civilization incredibly modern in its sensibilities, yet endlessly frustrating for historians trying to find its rulers hiding in plain sight. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro or Harappa is an experience that would feel strangely familiar to a modern city dweller, and that in itself is a profound mystery. Unlike the organic, winding alleys of many ancient towns, the streets of the Indus Valley form a perfect grid pattern, a network of wide main avenues intersecting with smaller side lanes that divide the city into neat, functional blocks. This wasn't a haphazard growth, it was a master plan executed with a precision that would challenge many modern developers. The coordination required for such a feat is staggering, pointing to a level of centralized authority and social organization that seems to appear out of nowhere in the archaeological record. How did they achieve this breathtaking uniformity, and what does it say about the people who designed it? The most tangible evidence of this centralized control is found in the smallest details, the bricks. Throughout the vast expanse of the Indus Valley, from major cities to smaller towns, the baked bricks used in construction conform to a standardized ratio. Their dimensions are consistently in a perfect 4:2:1 proportion. This isn't a trivial detail. It means that a brick manufactured in the city of Lothal, hundreds of miles away on the coast, would fit perfectly into a wall in Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. This standardization implies an incredible degree of coordination, suggesting either a strong, unified central authority issuing building codes or a highly developed and widespread craft tradition that agreed upon universal standards. It speaks of a civilization that thought systematically, valuing order and predictability on an almost industrial scale. This obsession with order extends below the streets to what is arguably the civilization's most brilliant innovation, its water management system. Every single house, no matter how modest, was equipped with a bathing area and a dedicated wastewater drain. These private drains fed into larger, covered sewer lines that ran beneath the main streets, complete with manholes for regular inspection and cleaning. They engineered these channels with a slight gradient to ensure everything flowed smoothly out of the city. This was not a luxury reserved for the elite, it was a universal feature of urban life. The entire city was designed to be clean, to manage waste efficiently, and to control water. A concern for public health that would not be matched in scale or sophistication until the days of the Roman Empire millennia later. Which brings us back to the central, puzzling question: who was in charge? In other contemporary civilizations, such monumental public works are directly tied to the ego and power of a visible ruler. We see the pharaoh's face on the monuments built by his command, but in the Indus Valley, the architect remains anonymous. There are no grand administrative palaces overflowing with tablets recording the decrees of a king, no royal seals claiming ownership of the project. The authority that orchestrated this urban masterpiece is invisible. This has led to fascinating theories about the nature of their governance. Perhaps they were ruled by a council of wise elders or a guild of powerful merchants whose authority was based on consensus and practical need rather than divine right or military force. Their power was not expressed through statues of themselves, but through the flawless functioning of the city. The true leader of Mohenjo-daro might not have been a person, but an idea, the idea of collective well-being, of a society that invested its greatest efforts not in glorifying individuals, but in improving the daily life of every single citizen. Perhaps the most astonishing feature of this civilization-wide coordination is its sheer geographic scale. The Indus Valley Civilization was not a small, localized culture. It was an empire of trade and ideas that stretched over an area of more than 1 million square kilometers, from the banks of the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan to the far-flung outposts in western India. This is a territory larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. To put that into perspective, imagine a culture based in Paris maintaining identical city layouts, brick sizes, and artifact designs in settlements as far away as Moscow, Rome, and Berlin, all without the benefit of horses, wheels for transportation, or any form of rapid communication. The logistical challenge of maintaining such uniformity across this vast and varied landscape, with its deserts, rivers, and mountains, is almost incomprehensible. It suggests a level of integration and shared identity that is unparalleled in the ancient world. This homogeneity is visible in the artifacts that define their daily and economic life. Take the famous Indus seals, for example. These small, square soapstone tablets carved with animals and undeciphered script are found in virtually identical form from one end of the civilization to the other. The style of carving, the choice of animals like the unicorn-like creature, and the short lines of script are so consistent that a seal found in the coastal city of Lothal is indistinguishable from one discovered hundreds of miles inland at Harappa. The same is true for their system of weights. Archaeologists have uncovered cubical stone weights that follow a precise and uniform standard. The basic unit was approximately 13.7 grams, and these weights increased in a perfect decimal progression, so 1 unit, 2 units, 10 units, and so on. A merchant in the northern city of Rakagahi would have used weights identical to those used by a trader in the southern port of Dolivera, ensuring fairness and trust in transactions across immense distances. This wasn't a loose similarity, it was a rigorously enforced standard. So how did they achieve this? The prevailing theory points to a highly developed and extensive trade network that acted as the civilization's circulatory system, carrying not just goods but ideas, styles, and standards. The Indus people were master traders with established routes overland by ox cart and overseas by boat. Evidence of their trade has been found as far away as Mesopotamia, where cuneiform tablets mention a land called Meluha, believed to be the Indus region, from which they imported exotic woods, carnelian beads, and ivory. This constant movement of merchants and craftsmen between population centers would have naturally disseminated cultural norms and technological standards. A potter from Mohenjo-daro traveling to a smaller town would bring with him the knowledge of the standard ceramic styles. A merchant would insist on using the approved weights to ensure his business was conducted fairly. Trade, therefore, became the mechanism for cultural cohesion, creating a shared economic language that fostered astonishing uniformity. But was trade alone enough to explain such precise standardization over such a vast area? Some researchers believe there must have been something more, a strong, central ideological or administrative force. This doesn't necessarily mean a single emperor ruling from a throne, but perhaps a powerful priestly class or a guild of elite merchants who promulgated these standards. They might have sent out emissaries or inspectors to ensure that outlying settlements adhered to the accepted norms of urban planning and manufacturing. The consistent layout of the cities, especially the presence of a raised citadel area in major centers, suggests that certain ideals of cityhood were non-negotiable. Founding a new settlement wasn't a free-for-all. It was likely a project undertaken with a master plan in mind, a blueprint for what an Indus city should be. This points to a shared cultural blueprint, a deeply ingrained set of principles that defined their identity. Whether this blueprint was enforced by a central authority or was simply a cultural ideal so strong that everyone aspired to it remains one of the most intriguing questions. The result, however, is clear: a civilization that spoke in a single, unified architectural and artistic language across a continent. Amidst the grand uniformity of their cities and artifacts, perhaps no object is more iconic of the Indus Valley Civilization than its intricate seals. Thousands of these small, square stamps, expertly carved from soft steatite stone and then fired to a durable, glossy finish, have been unearthed from ruins across the entire region. They are miniature masterpieces of artistry and precision, each one a tiny window into a world of symbols we can see but not yet understand. On their faces, they most commonly depict a single, powerful animal: a bull, an elephant, a rhinoceros, or a tiger, standing alert and often positioned before a curious object that looks like a ritual feed trough or incense burner. But it's the mysterious creature that appears most frequently that truly captivates researchers. A beast with a single, forward curving horn, a powerful neck hump, and a body that seems part bull, part myth. This so-called unicorn is the most common motif, yet it has no parallel in the natural world or in any other contemporary culture, making it a symbol utterly unique to the Indus people. The practical purpose of these seals seems, at first glance, relatively straightforward. The flat, reverse side usually has a raised boss pierced with a hole, suggesting they were meant to be strung on a cord and worn or carried. Their backs are often worn smooth from handling. Most tellingly, archaeologists have found their distinct impressions on clay tags that were once affixed to bundles of goods, and even on the moist clay used to seal the knots of ropes on doorways. This evidence strongly points to a primary function in trade and security. A merchant would press his unique seal into the clay tag on a shipment of goods, effectively signing it and guaranteeing its contents or ownership. A homeowner might seal a storage room with a rope and a dollop of clay stamped with their mark, providing a tamper-proof lock. In this sense, the seals were the ancient equivalent of a corporate logo, a notary's stamp, and a signature all rolled into one, facilitating a complex economy built on trust and verification across vast distances. But to assume they were merely functional tools is to miss their deeper, more enigmatic significance. The animals depicted are not simple, generic sketches. They are rendered with astonishing anatomical accuracy and a palpable sense of vitality. The bulls are portrayed with a careful attention to musculature, the elephants with their distinct skin texture. This level of detail suggests the animals were more than just pretty pictures. They likely held symbolic meaning. Were they clan totems representing the family or guild of the seal's owner? Did a particular animal signify a specific trade, a bull for a grain merchant, an elephant for a timber trader? Or were they protective symbols, spirit animals intended to guard the goods or the individual who carried the seal? The fact that the mythical unicorn is the most common symbol complicates this further. Its prevalence suggests it may have held a special, perhaps even sacred, status that transcended individual clans, possibly representing a concept central to the entire civilization's identity. Adding another profound layer of mystery is the short line of script that almost always appears above the animal. This is where the seal's function as a practical stamp collides with the maddening silence of their undeciphered language. The inscription was undoubtedly meant to be read to convey specific information about the owner, a name, a title, or a location. But without the ability to read it, we are left to wonder if these inscriptions are purely prosaic or if they contain short invocations or religious phrases. Some seals break from the animal motif entirely and present us with startling narrative scenes. The most famous of these is the so-called Pashupati seal, which depicts a human-like figure seated in a yogic posture with knees splayed out and heels touching. He appears to have 3 faces and wears a headdress of horns, and he is surrounded by animals: a rhino, a buffalo, an elephant, and a tiger. The resemblance to the later Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, the lord of all animals, is striking and has fueled endless speculation about the religious continuity between the Indus Valley and later Indian traditions. But is this truly a proto-Shiva, or are we projecting later beliefs onto an image whose original meaning is forever lost? Other rare seals show entire processions with lines of people wearing identical headdresses or scenes of a figure grappling with tigers, reminiscent of Mesopotamian hero myths. These are not simple ownership marks. They are frozen moments from a lost mythology, tiny snapshots of stories we can no longer hear. This duality makes the seals the ultimate expression of the Indus enigma. They are at once the most common and practical of objects used in the daily hustle of commerce, and yet they are also the most tantalizingly spiritual, hinting at a rich world of belief and symbolism. They were tools for the real world and vessels for the mythological one. In the hands of an Indus merchant, a seal was a key to economic life, a guarantee of authenticity in a vast trade network. But in the mind of that same individual, the image carved upon it, the powerful unicorn, the meditative deity, may have represented something far deeper, a connection to the divine, a statement of identity, or a fragment of a story that defined their place in the cosmos. They are a perfect, beautiful paradox, these small stones that speak volumes about what the Indus people did, but whisper only hints about who they truly were. In a world defined by ancient conquests and empires built on military might, the Indus Valley Civilization presents a startling and almost utopian anomaly. While the ruins of their cities reveal almost every aspect of a sophisticated society, from advanced drainage to bustling marketplaces, they are conspicuously silent on one subject that dominates the archaeological record of their contemporaries: war. This profound absence of evidence is one of the most debated and puzzling aspects of their culture, forcing us to ask a radical question. Were they one of history's first and only large-scale peaceful civilizations? When we excavate the sites of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, or even the Minoans on Crete, the signs of organized violence are everywhere. We find massive defensive walls with fortified gates, arsenals of swords, spears, and arrowheads, vivid depictions of pharaohs smiting their enemies on temple walls, and clear evidence of cities being sacked and burned. Now compare that to the Indus Valley. Their cities, including the massive centers of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, lacked any form of significant defensive fortifications. There are no towering walls designed to repel armies, no strategically placed bastions for archers, and no heavily fortified citadels designed as final strongholds. The raised areas within their cities, often called citadels, seem to have been administrative or ritual centers, not military redoubts. Furthermore, the artifact record is equally telling. Archaeologists have indeed found objects that could be used as weapons: copper and bronze knives, spears, and axes. But here's the crucial distinction. These objects are overwhelmingly found in contexts that suggest they were tools, not instruments of war. The axes appear to have been used for woodworking or clearing land. The knives are more associated with butchery or everyday craft than with combat. There is a complete absence of specialized, mass-produced weaponry designed specifically for battle, like the distinct swords, javelins, and armor that appear in the graves of warriors from other cultures. Perhaps most strikingly, their intricate seal carvings and the rare examples of their art depict animals, rituals, and mythical figures, but not a single scene of conquest, captivity, or battle. Their artists seem to have no visual language for warfare. This evidence has led some scholars to propose a revolutionary idea: that the Indus Valley Civilization achieved its remarkable longevity and stability not through military dominance, but through economic and cultural influence. They may have been a society of traders and administrators, not warriors. Their power could have been projected through the control of coveted resources like carnelian beads, ivory, and cotton cloth, establishing a vast economic network that made conflict unnecessary. In this view, their uniformity of culture wasn't enforced by the sword, but adopted voluntarily because it was beneficial. It was a network of shared standards that facilitated prosperity, making the costly endeavor of warfare counterproductive. This would make them a stunning exception in human history, a complex state-level society that resolved conflicts through commerce and diplomacy instead of violence. However, many other researchers urge extreme caution, pointing out that an absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The simple fact is that the vast majority of an Indus Valley city remains unexcavated, buried deep beneath waterlogged soil and later settlements. It is entirely possible that evidence of conflict has simply not been found yet. Perhaps their weapons were made primarily of wood and other perishable materials that have long since decayed, leaving no trace. Maybe battles were fought far from the city centers in areas that haven't been thoroughly investigated. It's also possible that warfare took a form that doesn't leave a clear archaeological signature, such as raiding, guerrilla tactics, or ritualized combat that didn't involve mass casualties or the destruction of cities. Another compelling theory suggests that the Indus people may have been so powerful and dominant in their region that they faced no credible external threats for centuries, eliminating the need for heavy fortifications. Their perceived peace might not have been a philosophical choice, but a privilege of their geographic and strategic supremacy. Alternatively, conflict could have existed but been so rare or so decisively won that it didn't require a permanent culture of militarization. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. They were probably not the utopian pacifists of some imaginations, but they also clearly did not define themselves through warfare and conquest like their contemporaries. Their priorities were starkly different. They invested their collective energy and genius not in building walls and arsenals, but in creating a sustainable, healthy, and prosperous urban life for their citizens. In the silent, undefended streets of their cities, we find perhaps their most enduring mystery, a blueprint for a civilization that valued public wells over palaces and clean drains over conquest. This puzzling silence on matters of faith brings us directly to one of the most profound absences in the Indus Valley archaeological record, the temple. In nearly every other ancient civilization, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the great temples of Egypt, religious architecture is the most dominant and enduring feature, a stone declaration of a society's devotion to its gods. Yet in the meticulously planned cities of the Indus, no such building has been conclusively identified. There are no grand structures adorned with religious iconography, no obvious altars for public sacrifice, no vast courtyards for congregational worship. This is not to say they were not a spiritual people, far from it, but their spirituality appears to have been expressed in a way that is utterly alien to our modern understanding of ancient religion, leaving us to piece together their beliefs from fragments and hints. This absence forces us to ask a radical question. What if their entire city was their temple? The incredible emphasis on water, purity, and communal hygiene, evidenced by the great bath and the elaborate drainage in every home, suggests that ritual cleanliness may have been intrinsically woven into the fabric of their daily life, not confined to a special building. Their veneration of the divine might have been practiced in the home, at communal wells, or in the carefully maintained bath areas found in every residence. Perhaps their rituals were mobile, happening in processions through the wide streets or gatherings in large open courtyards that served multiple purposes. Without a centralized religious authority building monumental temples, their faith could have been more decentralized, domestic, and integrated, making it virtually invisible in the architectural record. What little evidence we do have for their spiritual life comes not from buildings, but from small, enigmatic artifacts that whisper of complex beliefs. The most famous of these is the statue known as the Priest King. Discovered in Mohenjo-daro, this 17-centimeter tall figure carved from steatite is a masterpiece of ancient art. He sits with an upright, imposing posture, his expression serene yet authoritative. He wears a robe with a trefoil pattern, a design that may have been filled with red paste to make it stand out, and a headband with a circular central ornament. But it's his eyes that are most haunting. They are half closed, seemingly in a state of deep, meditative focus. The title Priest King is, of course, an modern interpretation. He may not have been a king at all. He could represent a high priest, a wise elder, or a deity. His inscrutable gaze and composed demeanor suggest a figure of immense spiritual authority, a man who bridged the world of the everyday and the divine, yet his true identity and role remain locked within that calm stone face. Other objects hint at ritual practices centered on nature and fertility. Terracotta figurines of women with elaborate headdresses and exaggerated feminine features are common finds. Often called mother goddess figures, these may represent a powerful deity of fertility, childbirth, and the protection of the home. Worshippers might have kept these small statues in domestic shrines, offering prayers for healthy children and bountiful harvest. Then there are the strange, conical stones that have been unearthed, which some archaeologists interpret as lingams, phallic symbols associated with the Hindu god Shiva that represent creative energy and potency. If this interpretation is correct, it would suggest a direct link between Indus Valley beliefs and the later religious traditions of the Indian subcontinent, a thread of continuity stretching over 4,000 years. The most compelling evidence for a structured belief system, however, comes from those ubiquitous seals. The recurring depiction of the mythic unicorn, an animal that does not exist in nature, strongly suggests it was a symbolic creature, perhaps a protective spirit or a vehicle for a god. Even more telling is the Pashupati seal, which depicts a horned figure seated in a clear yoga posture surrounded by animals. This image is a thunderclap of implication. It suggests the practice of meditation and asceticism, a concept of a lord or protector of animals, and a possible prototype for one of the most important gods in the Hindu pantheon. It paints a picture of a spirituality deeply connected to the natural world and concerned with the mastery of the inner self. Ultimately, the religious world of the Indus Valley people is a panorama we are viewing through a keyhole. We catch glimpses of a priest-king's authority, a mother goddess's nurturing power, a meditative deity's tranquil command over nature, and a pervasive reverence for purity and water. But we cannot see the full picture of their ceremonies, their prayers, or their understanding of the cosmos. Theirs was a faith that seemingly needed no monumental stone declarations to the gods, finding its expression instead in the orderly flow of water, the quiet contemplation of a seal, and the small clay figurine kept in a home. It was a spirituality woven into the everyday, which is perhaps why, despite its profound importance, it has been so difficult for us to find. Amidst the grand questions of governance and religion, one of the most captivating and intimate artifacts ever found is a small bronze statue that could easily fit in the palm of your hand. Discovered in Mohenjo-daro, she is known simply as the Dancing Girl, and she stands with a defiant confidence that has captivated viewers for nearly a century. Cast using the lost wax method over 4,000 years ago, she is less than 11 centimeters tall, yet she conveys more personality and vitality than any other object from the civilization. Her arms are draped with a collection of bangles, one arm akimbo on her hip, while the other rests lightly on her thigh, holding what some believe to be a small offering. She stands in a relaxed but poised contrapposto, her weight resting on one leg, the other slightly bent. But it is her face that is most arresting. Her head is tilted back slightly, her lips are full, and her nose is sharp. She wears her hair in a loose plait that falls over one shoulder, and she looks out at the world with an expression that can only be described as insouciant, a mixture of boldness, charm, and unshakable self-assurance. The immediate and most common interpretation of her is right there in the name, that she is a dancer, perhaps captured in a moment of rest between performances. Her slender, graceful form and her confident posture do suggest the bearing of a professional performer. The sheer number of bangles, 25 on one arm alone, could be the trappings of her trade, creating a melodious sound with her every movement. This has led to visions of her entertaining elites in the citadel or performing at vibrant public festivals, a celebrated artist in a society that valued such skills. But this interpretation is not without its modern biases. Early archaeologists working within a colonial framework were quick to label her a nautch girl, a term for a courtesan or entertainer, which may say more about their own preconceptions than about her true identity. A more profound possibility is that she represents not an ordinary woman, but a divine one. Could this be a depiction of a goddess, her fearless demeanor, and the fact that she was cast in precious bronze? A complex and costly process suggests she was no common trinket. She may have been a votive offering placed in a shrine to honor a deity of dance, music, or fertility. Alternatively, she might herself be an icon, a physical representation of a goddess meant to be worshipped in a domestic setting. Her confident, almost challenging gaze could be the look of a powerful divinity, a protector spirit or a bestower of blessings frozen in metal for eternity. Perhaps the most grounding theory is that she is neither a dancer nor a goddess, but simply a woman of the Indus Valley depicted with stunning realism. She could be a fashionable elite citizen adorned in her finest jewelry, a woman captured in a moment of everyday life, or a portrait of a specific, respected individual. This interpretation makes her humanity all the more powerful. She isn't an idealized symbol or a religious icon, she is a person. Her bangles weren't just for performance, they were a sign of wealth, status, or cultural identity. This view suggests that Indus art had a strand of breathtaking naturalism, an ability to capture the human spirit in a way that feels instantly familiar across the millennia. Beyond the mystery of her identity, the dancing girl is a silent testament to the astonishing technological prowess of her creators. Her very existence speaks volumes about a society operating at the pinnacle of Bronze Age metallurgy. She was created using the Sire Perdue, or lost wax technique, a sophisticated multi-step process that reveals a deep understanding of materials and physics. It began with an artist sculpting a precise wax model of the figure. This model was then carefully coated in thick clay, forming a mold and pierced with several small channels. The entire assembly was fired in a kiln which hardened the clay and, crucially, caused the wax inside to melt and drain out through the channels, hence the term lost wax. What remained was a hollow clay mold, a perfect negative space of the sculpture. Molten bronze, a carefully controlled alloy of copper and tin, was then poured into this cavity. Once the metal cooled and solidified, the clay mold was broken away to reveal the rough metal casting inside, which was then polished and finished by hand. The success of this technique requires incredible skill and control. The artisan must calculate the precise thickness of the wax original to ensure the metal fills the mold completely without cracking or forming bubbles. The placement of the channels is critical for the even flow of metal and the escape of gases. The fact that the Indus metalworkers employed this method for such a small, detailed figure, capturing the delicate features of the face, the slender limbs, and the multitude of bangles, shows a mastery that was centuries ahead of its time. This was not a primitive first attempt, it was the product of a long-developed tradition of artistic metalworking. She is not an isolated masterpiece, but rather proof of a thriving craft, likely produced by guilds of specialized artisans who possessed knowledge passed down through generations. The dancing girl, in all her confident glory, is therefore far more than a beautiful object. She is a complex riddle of identity and a brilliant flash of technological lightning, a single figure who embodies the artistic soul and engineering genius of an entire civilization. If the dancing girl showcases their artistic mastery in bronze, then the sheer volume and variety of metal objects found across the Indus Valley speak to an industrial-scale operation. This was a civilization that didn't just work with metal, they perfected its use in everyday life, creating a sophisticated economic system underpinned by an almost scientific precision. Their metallurgical knowledge was not a side project. It was central to their identity as master craftspeople and international traders, making the complete disappearance of this technical expertise after their collapse all the more baffling. The range of metals they utilized is impressive in its own right. They were prolific workers of copper, smelting it from ores sourced from as far away as modern-day Rajasthan and Oman. This copper was then transformed into a vast array of tools: flat axes for woodworking, chisels for detailed carving, fish hooks for securing their food supply, and spearheads that were likely used for hunting rather than warfare. But they didn't stop there. They pioneered complex alloys, most notably bronze, by mixing copper with tin. The sources of this tin remain one of the smaller, yet fascinating, mysteries. It may have come from distant Afghanistan or even Central Asia, indicating the incredible reach of their trade networks just to acquire raw materials. They also worked with lead and the precious gold and silver, which were fashioned into exquisite jewelry like beads, pendants, and elaborate necklaces for the elite. However, their true genius lies not just in what they made, but in how they made it. They employed the full repertoire of advanced metalworking techniques. They were masters of casting, using the lost wax method for intricate figures like the dancing girl, and simpler stone molds for mass-producing items like arrowheads and chisels. They practiced hammering and annealing, heating and cooling the metal to make it more malleable and less brittle, allowing them to create thin, delicate vessels and tools. Evidence also suggests they had a working knowledge of soldering and riveting, techniques used to join metal pieces together without casting them as one solid piece. This wasn't trial and error. This was the application of a deep, systematic understanding of material science that was arguably unmatched in the world at that time. This technical prowess was seamlessly integrated into the engine of their economy, and it was governed by a system of breathtaking accuracy, their standardized weights. These weren't rough stones chosen for their heft. They were meticulously crafted cubical blocks made of chert, a hard stone, finely polished to an exact mass. The system itself was brilliantly simple and universally adopted across the entire civilization. The basic unit was approximately 13.7 grams. From this base, the weights increased in a perfect decimal progression. Doubles, multiples of 4, multiples of 8, and so on, all the way up to large units of over 1,300 grams. A merchant in the distant port city of Lothal used weights that were identical to those used by a trader in the northern metropolis of Harappa. This meant that a transaction could occur over 1,000 kilometers apart with absolute confidence and no dispute over the quantity of goods being exchanged. It was a system that enabled trust and fairness across a vast economic zone, functioning as the silent, indispensable backbone of their commercial empire. And then it all vanished. When the Indus cities were abandoned and their culture fragmented, this deep, complex knowledge of metallurgy and metrology seems to have evaporated. The subsequent centuries in the region, often associated with the Vedic period, show a dramatic technological regression. The sophisticated lost wax casting disappears. The mass production of standardized copper tools ceases. Most strikingly, the entire system of cubical stone weights falls completely out of use, replaced by entirely different weight systems that bear no relation to the Indus standard. It is as if a switch was flipped, plunging the region into a technological dark age. How could such advanced and practical knowledge be completely lost? The answer likely lies in the very structure of their society. This was not knowledge held by a few lone geniuses. It was the specialized domain of organized guilds and workshops. These were centralized industries dependent on the stable, urban environment of the cities and the long-distance trade networks that supplied their raw materials. When that civilization collapsed, the support system for these artisans disintegrated. The guilds were broken up, the apprenticeships ended, and the master craftspeople likely scattered into smaller, rural communities where their specialized skills were no longer in demand. Without a centralized authority to maintain standards, without the constant demand from a thriving urban market, and without the secure trade routes to bring in tin and copper, the knowledge simply faded away within a generation or two. The techniques were too complex to maintain without a structured, supportive society, and so they died out, leaving behind only the silent, perfect weights and the beautiful bronze figures as evidence of a technological peak that would not be seen again in the subcontinent for over 1,000 years. This mathematical precision reveals a society that thought in numbers and ratios, a culture of traders and administrators who needed absolute accuracy to function. The consistency is nothing short of astounding. A merchant in the coastal city of Lothal, weighing out a shipment of precious carnelian beads, would use a set of stone weights that were perfectly identical to those used by a colleague hundreds of miles inland at Harappa to measure out grain. This wasn't a loose similarity, it was a rigorously enforced civilization-wide standard. It meant that a trade transaction could occur over a vast distance without any need for negotiation or conversion. A unit was a unit, whether you were on the banks of the Indus or the shores of the Arabian Sea. This system built a foundation of incredible trust and efficiency, greasing the wheels of an economic network that stretched for over 1 million square kilometers. The sophistication of this system goes far beyond simple standardization. The weights themselves were crafted with incredible care from durable materials like chert and agate, finely chipped and polished to an exact mass. But the real genius is in the progression. The base unit, which archaeologists calculate at approximately 13.7 grams, wasn't chosen at random. From this foundation, the system scales up in a beautifully logical sequence. You have smaller fractional weights for measuring very small quantities of valuable items, perhaps spices or precious metals. Then the weights increase in a perfect decimal progression. 1 unit, 2 units, 4 units, 8 units, 16 units, 32 units, and so on, all the way up to large weights of over 1,300 grams. This binary cum decimal system is a masterpiece of practical mathematics. It allowed for any quantity to be measured through simple combinations of these standardized blocks, making commerce fast, fair, and remarkably sophisticated. This presents us with a fascinating paradox. Here we have clear, undeniable evidence of advanced mathematical thinking, a conceptual understanding of ratios, decimals, and standardization that would be the envy of any ancient accountant. Yet we have absolutely no surviving mathematical texts, no clay tablets covered in calculations, no treatises on geometry, no scratch pads for merchants to tally their sums. Unlike the Mesopotamians, who left behind thousands of tablets detailing complex mathematical problems, the Indus Valley people have left us only the silent tools of their trade. So where did this knowledge reside? The answer likely lies in the very nature of their civilization. This was not a society that invested in grand libraries or royal inscriptions. Their knowledge was probably practical, transmitted orally and through apprenticeship, embedded in the daily routines of their workshops and marketplaces. The master craftsperson who manufactured the weights would have held the precise ratios in their head, teaching their apprentices through hands-on demonstration. A seasoned merchant would have an intuitive, mental grasp of how to combine the weights to measure any quantity needed. The mathematics were applied, not theoretical. They were woven into the fabric of their commercial life, so essential that they perhaps never felt the need to write them down. The weights themselves were their mathematics, a physical, tangible expression of their numerical genius. The system was so effective, so ingrained in their culture, that the abstract principles behind it simply lived in the minds of the people who used it every single day, until the day their civilization faded away and that precious, practical knowledge was lost to time. Rising above the flat, grid-like streets of the major Indus cities are their most prominent and puzzling features, the citadels. These massive, man-made mud brick platforms, towering up to 40 feet high, dominate the urban landscape of centers like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Kalibangan. They are impossible to miss, and their imposing presence immediately suggests they held a place of supreme importance. Yet, despite their size and central location, their exact purpose remains one of the most debated mysteries. Were these the fortified strongholds of rulers, the sacred ground of priests, or the administrative hearts of a meticulously planned society? The evidence, as always, is tantalizingly ambiguous. The most straightforward interpretation, and the one that gives these structures their common name, is that they were defensive fortifications. In a world where rival cities and marauding tribes were a constant threat, building a high, fortified area makes perfect sense. The elevated position would have given defenders a commanding view of the surrounding plains and a significant advantage against any attacker. The fact that the citadel at Mohenjo-daro was further reinforced with massive baked brick revetments or retaining walls adds weight to this idea. These sturdy walls would have prevented the massive mud brick foundations from eroding and also made the platform difficult to scale. If this theory is correct, then the citadel was the ultimate refuge, the final redoubt where the city's elite and its treasures could be safeguarded during a siege. It would paint a picture of an Indus Valley that was not entirely peaceful, but one that understood the grim necessity of defense. However, this militaristic interpretation runs into a significant problem: a complete lack of any other supporting evidence for warfare. As we've discussed, there are no stockpiles of weapons, no depictions of battle on seals, and no layers of ash from sacked and burned cities. If the citadels were military forts, where are the barracks for the soldiers? Where are the armories filled with spears and swords? Where are the guardhouses controlling access to the ramps? This conspicuous absence has led many archaeologists to propose a far more intriguing possibility: that these were not military citadels at all, but rather symbolic centers of power. Their height may not have been for defense, but for prestige, a way to physically and visually separate the ruling or priestly class from the rest of the population. In this view, the elevation was a statement of authority, a way to literally look down upon the bustling city below and reinforce a social hierarchy. The structures built on top, like the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro, were then not designed for survival in war, but for the rituals and administration that held the civilization together. This leads us to the fascinating array of buildings actually found on these platforms, which point strongly towards a ceremonial and administrative function. At Mohenjo-daro, the citadel is home to the iconic Great Bath, a structure that screams ritual purity rather than military function. Right next to it is the so-called granary, a massive building with a complex foundation of air ducts and loading bays that suggest it was used for the centralized storage of the city's grain surplus. Controlling the food supply is a classic method of social and economic control. The combination of a ritual cleansing facility and a central grain store on the same raised platform is incredibly telling. It suggests the citadel was the nerve center for both spiritual and economic power. The elite residing or working here wouldn't have just been warlords, they would have been a combination of priest, administrator, and warehouse manager, wielding power through their control of both the gods and the grain. The citadel at Calibangan offers a different but equally revealing clue. There, archaeologists found a series of distinctive fire altars on the raised platforms, small, rectangular pits lined with clay and containing ash and sacrificial offerings. This is a clear indication of ritual activity happening in this elevated space. Similarly, the citadel at Harappa features rows of circular working platforms, believed to have been used for processing grain or other materials, again tying the high ground to large-scale economic organization. The evidence taken together builds a compelling case that the citadel was the civilization's administrative and ritual headquarters. It was a multi-functional acropolis where the handful of people who kept the entire complex system running, organizing trade, storing harvests, and performing the ceremonies that ensured cosmic and social order, conducted their business. So why does the mystery persist? Because the Indus people, in their typical fashion, left us no written manuals or grand inscriptions explaining the purpose of these colossal undertakings. We can see what is there, but we cannot hear the speeches given from their heights or see the rituals performed in their precincts. The citadel stands as the ultimate symbol of Indus power, but it is a silent symbol. It represents a form of authority that was likely collective, bureaucratic, and deeply intertwined with religion and the economy, rather than autocratic and militaristic. It was the brain of the operation, not the fist, and without a decipherment of their script, we may never know exactly what thoughts that brain was thinking, or whose voices echoed across that commanding height, directing the flow of a civilization below. This gradual fading away, this systematic departure from the very urban centers that defined their civilization, is itself one of the most profound mysteries. Unlike the ruins of many ancient cities which bear the clear scars of a sudden, violent end, a layer of ash from a great fire, smashed walls from a siege, or skeletons lying where they fell, the great Indus centers like Mohenjo-daro tell a different, more subtle story. The evidence points not to a single cataclysm, but to a slow, deliberate unraveling, a prolonged farewell to urban life that must have been as confusing to its inhabitants as it is to us today. Walk through the later levels of Mohenjo-daro and you don't find widespread destruction. Instead, you find a quiet decline in standards. The meticulous brickwork of the great civic structures begins to be replaced with cheaper, flimsier materials. There are signs that the magnificent drainage systems, the pride of the city, were starting to fall into disrepair. Later constructions sometimes break the sacred grid of the streets, as if the old rules of urban planning were no longer being enforced by any central authority. Most tellingly, the population density appears to have decreased. Parts of the city were abandoned first, with people crowding into other neighborhoods before those too were eventually left behind. It's the archaeological equivalent of a house where the owners, knowing they will have to move out soon, stop painting the fences and fixing the leaks. The love and care for the place is gone, replaced by a pragmatic, managed decline. So what could cause an entire population to simply lose faith in their way of life? The most compelling explanations involve a cascade of interconnected failures, a perfect storm of environmental, economic, and social crises that slowly choked the life out of the cities. Imagine the foundation of their society, the rivers, beginning to betray them. We have strong evidence that the mighty Gagahakra river system, which once fed the breadbasket of the civilization, began to dry up or change course due to shifts in monsoon patterns or tectonic activity. This wouldn't have been an overnight disaster, but a generations-long crisis. Farmers would have watched their fields become less productive each year. A once reliable harvest might fail one year, then another, creating chronic food shortages that strained the city's vast grain storage facilities. The economic engine of the civilization, which was built on agricultural surplus, would have begun to sputter. This environmental stress would have had a domino effect. As crop yields fell, the tax base that supported the urban administrators and craftspeople would have shrunk. The brilliant artisans who made the standardized weights and carved the intricate seals may have found fewer and fewer customers for their wares. The long-distance trade networks that brought tin from Afghanistan and lapis lazuli from Central Asia would have frayed and then snapped without valuable agricultural goods to exchange. The very uniformity that held the civilization together began to break down as individual cities and towns were forced to become more self-reliant and insular. The shared culture that stretched from the mountains to the sea was no longer being reinforced by constant trade and travel. In this atmosphere of scarcity and uncertainty, the social contract itself may have begun to dissolve. The anonymous, faceless administrators who had maintained the glorious order for centuries might have lost their legitimacy. Why obey the rules of a central authority that can no longer guarantee a full granary or keep the trade routes open? People likely began to question the very point of urban life. Why live in a crowded city with failing systems when you could return to a simpler, more sustainable existence in a smaller village? The collapse, therefore, may not have been a violent death but a voluntary dispersal. People didn't die in the streets, they simply voted with their feet, slowly migrating away from the grand cities to start over elsewhere, taking their skills and knowledge with them but leaving the magnificent, empty shell of their former world behind. It was the end of a dream of urban living, not the end of a people. This puzzling absence of grand tombs brings us to a mystery that strikes at the very heart of how we understand power and belief in the ancient world, the missing royal burials. In nearly every other early civilization, the way a society treats its dead, especially its elite, is a direct reflection of its social structure and its beliefs about the afterlife. The pharaohs of Egypt were entombed within pyramids filled with unimaginable wealth to sustain them in the next world. The royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia contained not only golden treasures but the remains of courtiers and soldiers who were sacrificed to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. These were dramatic, chilling declarations of a king's absolute power, both in life and in death. yet in the Indus Valley we find nothing of the sort. This isn't just a minor omission, it's a thundering silence that forces us to ask a radical question. Did they even have kings in the way we understand them? The evidence we do have for their burial practices only deepens the mystery. Cemeteries have been found adjacent to their major cities, like at Harappa and Kalibangan. But these are not the lavish resting places of a god-king. Instead, they are remarkably egalitarian and utilitarian. The typical Indus Valley burial is a simple rectangular pit dug into the ground. The body was laid out in a north-south orientation, often placed within a wooden coffin or shrouded in a cloth. The grave goods included with them are modest and personal. A few pots likely containing food and water for the journey, some everyday jewelry like bangles or beads, and occasionally a small mirror or a simple cosmetic pot. There is no evidence of mass human sacrifice, no chambers overflowing with gold and weaponry, and no grand monuments marking the spot. It is a practice that suggests a belief in an afterlife that required simple sustenance, not a replication of earthly wealth and status. This dramatic contrast with Egypt and Mesopotamia is perhaps the most telling clue. In those cultures, the entire state apparatus could be mobilized for years to build a single royal tomb, an act that served to reinforce the power of the ruler and the priesthood. The Indus approach seems almost antithetical to this concept. The energy and resources that others poured into celebrating individual rulers, the Indus people appear to have invested in their living cities, in those sophisticated drains, public baths, and standardized brickwork that benefited the entire community. This suggests a fundamentally different worldview, one where the collective well-being of the society in the present may have been valued more highly than the glorification of a single individual for all eternity. So what does this mean for the question of leadership? The absence of royal tombs has led to several compelling theories. The first is the most revolutionary, that the Indus Valley Civilization simply did not have a single, all-powerful monarch. Power may have been distributed among a council of elders, a group of leading merchants, or a class of administrators who managed trade and resources. In this model, no one person held enough concentrated, deified power to warrant a tomb that dwarfed all others. Their authority was functional and perhaps temporary, derived from their ability to organize rather than from a claim of divine right. Another possibility is that their rulers were not celebrated in death because their beliefs about the afterlife were completely different. Perhaps they practiced excarnation, where the body was exposed to the elements or cremated, leaving no grave to find. Maybe their spiritual focus was on ancestral spirits rather than a single, mighty ruler destined for a glorious afterlife, leading to simpler, more uniform burial rites for everyone. Or perhaps the symbols of their leaders' power were not material objects meant to be buried, but were instead intangible things like knowledge, ritual authority, or control over trade networks, things that could not be interred in a pit. Ultimately, the missing tombs are a void that speaks volumes. They suggest a society that organized itself in a way that is almost unique in the ancient world, one that challenges our very definition of a civilization. We are so accustomed to equating complex societies with powerful kings that their absence in the Indus Valley is disorienting. It forces us to consider that their greatest innovation may not have been the grid plan or the drainage system, but a social structure that for centuries successfully managed to avoid the concentration of absolute power in the hands of one person, choosing instead to build a legacy not for a king but for everyone. While the grand citadels and mysterious seals capture our imagination, it is beneath the streets of the Indus Valley cities that we find perhaps their most practical and revolutionary achievement, a water management system of such sophistication that it would not be rivaled for over 3 millennia. In an era when many ancient peoples were still drawing water from communal rivers or muddy wells, the Indus inhabitants were enjoying a level of urban hygiene and hydraulic engineering that feels astonishingly modern. Their relationship with water was not one of struggle, but of mastery, a carefully orchestrated dance of supply, usage, and drainage that was woven into the very fabric of their urban design. This was not an added luxury, it was the fundamental cornerstone of their entire civilization. The system began at the source with an incredible network of wells that provided clean, reliable water to every neighborhood. In Mohenjo-daro alone, archaeologists have discovered over 700 wells, an astonishing density for an ancient city. But these were not simple holes in the ground. They were feats of engineering, constructed with precisely manufactured tapered bricks that formed a strong, circular shaft to prevent collapse. Many of them were located within the courtyard of nearly every house, offering a level of private access to fresh water that was unheard of in the contemporary world. For those not fortunate enough to have a private well, public wells were strategically placed at street corners, ensuring that no citizen had to travel far for this essential resource. This democratization of water access speaks volumes about their societal values, prioritizing public health and convenience in a way that even the Romans, with their magnificent aqueducts, did not for another 2,000 years. But securing the water was only half the equation. The Indus genius truly shines in what they did with it after it was used. Every single house, from the largest elite residence to the most modest craftsman's dwelling, was equipped with a dedicated bathing area. These were not simple buckets in a corner. They were finely constructed brick platforms with sloped floors that drained into a remarkably advanced city-wide sewer system. Each home's drain fed into a larger, covered channel that ran beneath the main streets. These underground sewers were built with a precise gradient to ensure a constant flow, and they were equipped with manholes at regular intervals for inspection and cleaning, a concept of municipal maintenance that is standard today but was revolutionary in the 3rd millennium BC. Wastewater was channeled away from the living areas and into sumps or out beyond the city walls, protecting the population from the waterborne diseases that plagued other ancient urban centers. This concern for managing water extended beyond waste to the control of its excess. At the coastal city of Dolivera, located in the dry and unpredictable climate of modern-day Gujarat, the inhabitants built a series of massive, intricate reservoirs to capture every precious drop of monsoon rain. These were not simple pits, they were meticulously carved into the living rock and lined with stone blocks, strategically placed around the city to channel runoff from the streets. The largest of these reservoirs is nearly 80 meters long and 12 meters deep, a colossal public works project that would have required immense planning and labor. This system allowed Dolivera to thrive in a harsh environment, storing enough water to sustain its population through long, dry seasons. It represents a shift from mere management to true hydraulic engineering, an understanding of how to harness and conserve water on a massive scale. The perplexing question that haunts archaeologists is not how they built these systems, but why this knowledge appears to be a brilliant, isolated flash of genius. The technology was clearly there, and it was profoundly effective. Yet, there is no evidence that these concepts spread westward to Mesopotamia or Egypt, civilizations with which the Indus people were actively trading. One would think that such a clear advantage in public health and urban livability would have been eagerly adopted. The answer may lie in the very nature of the Indus civilization itself. Their technology was deeply embedded in their unique social and urban fabric. It required the standardized brick sizes, the centralized urban planning, and the collective cultural will to prioritize public works over individual glorification. These were not portable gadgets that could be easily traded. They were integral components of a whole societal philosophy. When the Indus civilization declined, this vast, systemic knowledge seems to have simply evaporated. The later Vedic peoples who moved into the region did not build covered drains or massive public reservoirs. This technology died with the cities that relied on it, suggesting it was maintained by a specialized class of urban engineers and planners whose skills were no longer in demand when the population dispersed into smaller, rural villages. The loss was monumental. The world would have to wait until the 19th century for modern cities to once again achieve the same level of sophisticated sanitation that was commonplace on the streets of Mohenjo-daro 4,000 years earlier. Their water management system stands as a testament to a uniquely practical genius, a solution to the challenges of urban living so advanced that it would remain an unmatched ideal for countless generations to come. Of all the enigmatic symbols left behind by this civilization, none is more pervasive or perplexing than the creature that stares back at us from thousands of their carved seals. This is the famous unicorn of the Indus Valley, a beast depicted with a single curved horn protruding from its forehead, a powerful neck hump reminiscent of a bull, and a body often shown standing before a curious object that resembles a ritual incense burner or feed trough. Its image is not a rare find. It is, in fact, the single most common motif discovered, appearing on a vast majority of the seals unearthed across the entire span of their territory. This overwhelming prevalence tells us we are looking at something absolutely central to their identity, a symbol so potent and important that it was replicated countless times for generations. Yet, despite its ubiquity, the true meaning of this mythical creature remains one of the most tantalizing and hotly debated mysteries. The immediate and obvious question is whether this animal was ever real. Could the Indus people have been depicting a creature that actually roamed their world, one that has since gone extinct? Some have proposed it might be a highly stylized representation of an aurochs, the massive wild ancestor of modern cattle, with its two horns depicted from a perspective that makes them appear as one. Others have suggested it could be based on the Indian rhinoceros, though the single horn and overall bovine physique make this a less convincing match. The most compelling argument against it being a real animal, however, is its sheer consistency and the specific, ritualistic context in which it is always shown. Unlike the other animals on the seals, the bulls, elephants, and tigers, which are rendered with breathtaking anatomical accuracy, the unicorn is a composite, a creature of myth that never existed in the natural world. This was a deliberate invention, a symbol conjured from the collective imagination of an entire civilization. If it is not real, then what did it represent? The theories are as varied as they are fascinating. One prominent idea is that the unicorn was a symbol of raw, earthly power, perhaps the emblem of a dominant clan or a series of powerful ruling families. In this view, the seal was a stamp of authority, and the unicorn was their heraldic beast, much like a lion on a European coat of arms. Its frequent use could indicate that this particular group held sway over trade and administration across the civilization, their symbol becoming a universal mark of authenticity and control. Another possibility is that it served as a protective totem. A merchant sending his goods on a long, perilous journey might stamp his packages with the unicorn seal, believing its powerful image would safeguard the cargo from thieves, storms, or other misfortunes. The symbol would thus function as both a practical signature and a spiritual shield. The most profound interpretation, however, is that the unicorn was a sacred being, a mythological creature that held deep religious significance. Its constant association with the so-called ritual object placed before it is crucial. This object is not a random accessory. It appears with the unicorn time and again, suggesting a specific ceremonial function. Some researchers see it as an incense burner, implying the scene depicts a form of sacrifice or offering to this divine beast. Others interpret it as a sacred feed trough, symbolizing the creature's role as a bestower of abundance and prosperity. In this sacred context, the unicorn could have been a vahan, a divine vehicle for a god, much like Nandi the bull is for the Hindu god Shiva in later traditions. Or it could have been a deity in its own right, a powerful lord of animals or a guardian of the natural world. Its unique, singular horn might have been seen as a symbol of immense spiritual power or purity, a concept that appears in myths across many cultures. The mystery is deepened by the short line of script that almost always accompanies the image. This inscription, forever silent to our ears, was undoubtedly the key to understanding the seal's full meaning. It could have spelled out the name of the seal's owner, the title of a high official, or the name of the unicorn itself. It might have contained a short prayer or a magical invocation. Without deciphering these words, we are left to interpret the image in a vacuum, forever wondering if we are looking at a corporate logo, a protective charm, or a fragment of a lost mythology. The unicorn's silent, steadfast gaze is a powerful reminder that for all we have uncovered about the Indus Valley, their inner world of belief and symbol remains just beyond our reach, a beautiful and frustrating enigma stamped on stone. To support populations that may have numbered in the millions across their vast territory, the Indus Valley Civilization had to solve a problem that still challenges us today: how to feed a massive urban population from land that is, in many places, now arid and unforgiving. This points to a mastery of agriculture so advanced that its specific techniques have been almost entirely lost to history, leaving us to piece together how they turned potentially marginal land into a breadbasket capable of sustaining one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Their success wasn't just about planting seeds. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered system of water control, crop selection, and seasonal planning that we are only beginning to appreciate. Central to this agricultural revolution was their genius for harnessing water, not just in their cities but in their fields. Unlike Egypt, which relied on the predictable annual flooding of the Nile, the Indus system was fed by monsoon rains and snowmelt from the Himalayas, creating a less predictable and potentially more destructive flooding pattern. The Indus farmers didn't just accept this, they engineered solutions. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive irrigation canals, some stretching for kilometers, that would have diverted floodwaters to fields during the wet season and stored it for use during dry periods. At sites like Shortugai in northern Afghanistan, an Indus outpost established to acquire lapis lazuli and tin, they built elaborate irrigation networks that transformed a remote river valley into productive farmland, demonstrating that this knowledge was a portable, systematic technology they could deploy even in distant colonies. But their water management likely went far beyond simple canals. They may have employed a technique called floodwater farming, where they built strategic diversion barrages or check dams made of earth and stone across seasonal streams. These structures would have slowed the rush of monsoon water, allowing it to spread out over a wider area and percolate into the soil, effectively creating temporary, fertile wetlands for planting. This is a subtle form of engineering that leaves few obvious archaeological traces, which could explain why the full extent of their hydrological landscape management remains poorly understood. They weren't just fighting against their environment, they were working with it, sculpting the land on a grand scale to capture every possible drop of water. The choice of what to plant reveals another layer of their sophistication. They were not reliant on a single staple crop, but practiced a remarkably diverse and resilient form of agriculture. We know they cultivated wheat and barley, the classic grains of the ancient world, but they also grew an impressive array of other foods: dates, peas, sesame, and mustard. Most impressively, they were the first civilization to domesticate and weave cotton into cloth. This wasn't just for their own use. Cotton became a massive export commodity, traded with Mesopotamia for precious metals and other goods. This crop diversity was a brilliant risk management strategy. If the monsoon failed one year and the wheat crop suffered, the more drought-tolerant barley or the hardier pulses might still thrive, ensuring the population had something to fall back on. It created a buffer against famine that would have been crucial for urban stability. The true engine of their agricultural surplus, however, may have been their ability to double-crop their fields. Evidence suggests they harnessed the two major growing seasons of the region. the Rabi season, where crops like wheat and barley are planted after the monsoon recedes and grown on residual soil moisture, and the Kharif season, where crops like millet and cotton are planted just as the monsoon rains arrive. By carefully managing their water resources through irrigation, they could have potentially harvested 2 full crops from the same piece of land within a single year, a feat that would have dramatically multiplied their food output. This level of planned, intensive agriculture implies a deep, generational understanding of local microclimates, soil conditions, and hydrology, a body of knowledge that was likely passed down orally and through practical experience, leaving no manual for modern researchers to discover. This brings us to the great mystery and the tragic loss. How did this knowledge simply vanish? When the cities were abandoned and the population dispersed, the complex, large-scale infrastructure that supported this agricultural system fell into disrepair. The irrigation canals silted up, the carefully maintained fields were reclaimed by the desert. The knowledge of how to manage water across a whole region rather than just a single village was no longer needed and was therefore forgotten. The later Vedic texts, which describe a more pastoral, village-based society, make no mention of the vast canal networks or the double cropping techniques of their predecessors. The Indus farmers had created a delicate, managed ecosystem, and when the civilization that sustained it collapsed, that ecosystem and the knowledge required to maintain it disappeared back into the dust, leaving us to wonder at the green, abundant world that once existed where now there is mostly dry earth. While the Indus Valley people were masters of their own domain, their influence and ambition stretched far beyond the rivers that bore their name, weaving them into a web of international trade that reached across the known ancient world. The most tantalizing proof of this doesn't come from the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, but from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia over 2,000 kilometers to the west. Cuneiform inscriptions from the city of Ur repeatedly mention a distant, fabulously wealthy land called Meluha, a place from which Mesopotamian kings imported exotic goods, precious carnelian beads, dark ebony wood, and ivory. For decades, scholars have been almost certain that Meluha was the Indus Valley Civilization. This isn't just speculation, it's confirmed by the physical evidence. Archaeologists excavating Mesopotamian sites have indeed found distinctive Indus Valley products, etched carnelian beads with their unique white patterns, and most conclusively, several actual Indus seals discovered in the ruins of Mesopotamian cities. Here, lying in the dirt of a land between the Tigris and Euphrates, was the unmistakable stamp of a merchant from Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. Yet, this clear evidence of long-distance contact only deepens the central mystery of their trade. We know the what and the where, but the how remains almost entirely hidden. How did these goods travel such vast distances? The most likely answer is a combination of overland and maritime routes. Overland, goods would have been transported in ox carts, a common depiction on Indus seals along established routes through the mountain passes of Balochistan and into modern-day Iran. For the maritime leg, the Indus people were almost certainly skilled sailors. The presence of a massive, engineered dockyard at the coastal city of Lothal, complete with channels to control the flow of water and berths for ships, is a powerful testament to their seafaring capabilities. They would have built robust wooden ships, likely with woven sails, capable of riding the monsoon winds across the Arabian Sea to the ports of the Persian Gulf. This was not a casual coastal hopping trip. It was a daring, open-water voyage that required sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, navigation, and shipbuilding. The real puzzle lies in the organization of this entire economic machine. In Mesopotamia, trade was meticulously documented by a vast bureaucracy of temple and palace scribes. We have thousands of tablets detailing every aspect of their commercial ventures. In the Indus Valley, we have nothing of the sort. There are no grand administrative buildings overflowing with clay tablets recording shipments of cotton to Ur or payments of tin from Afghanistan. The entire engine of their economy seems to have been almost invisible. This suggests a radically different model of organization. Perhaps their trade was not a state-monopolized enterprise run by a royal palace, but was instead managed by powerful guilds of merchants. These private traders would have operated with a high degree of independence, using their seals as signatures of authenticity and their standardized weights to ensure fair dealing. Their record-keeping might have been done on perishable materials like palm leaves or woven cloth, which decayed without a trace, leaving us with only the durable end products, the beads, the seals, and the weights themselves. This system's efficiency is proven by the sheer uniformity of goods found across the civilization's expanse, but its silence is deafening. We can only imagine the bustling docks of Lothal, where ships were loaded with bales of bright white cotton and carefully packed boxes of beads. We can picture the caravan of ox carts setting out from Harappa, laden with ivory and bound for the high mountain passes. But we cannot name a single merchant, we cannot read a single shipping manifest, and we cannot trace a single complete route on a map. The Indus traders mastered the art of moving goods across continents, yet they left behind no boastful inscriptions celebrating their voyages, no maps of their routes, and no personal accounts of the dangers they faced. Their greatest economic achievement was conducted in a whisper, leaving behind a trail of beautiful objects in foreign lands that stand as silent witnesses to a network of connections we can only begin to reconstruct. Amidst the ruins of a civilization that meticulously avoided glorifying its rulers, one small object stands as a defiant exception to the rule. Discovered in the lower city of Mohenjo-daro, the statue known as the Priest King is a mere 17 centimeters tall, yet it carries the weight of an entire civilization's unanswered questions about power and authority. Carved from smooth, white steatite, this figure sits with an upright, imposing posture that feels far larger than its physical dimensions. His eyes are half closed, focused on a distant point as if in a state of deep meditation or tranquil command. He wears a cloak draped over one shoulder, decorated with a trefoil pattern that was likely originally filled with red paste to make it stand out vividly. But it is his headdress that is most arresting, a wide, intricate band with a circular central ornament and a projecting ribbon at the back. This is not the portrait of an ordinary man. This is an image of someone or something imbued with profound significance, and it remains one of the most intensely debated artifacts ever unearthed from the Indus Valley. The title Priest King itself is a modern invention, a label that reveals our own struggle to categorize a figure that doesn't fit neatly into our understanding of ancient leadership. The term implies a fusion of spiritual and temporal power, a being who held sway over both the sacred rituals and the civic administration of the city. His composed, meditative expression strongly suggests a spiritual dimension. The downcast eyes and serene facial features are not those of a conquering warrior or a boastful monarch. They are the countenance of a contemplative, perhaps someone who achieved authority through knowledge, wisdom, or a special connection to the divine. This has led many scholars to argue that he represents a high priest, a spiritual leader whose power was derived from his role as an interpreter of the god's will, and a master of complex rituals that ensured the city's prosperity and cosmic order. Yet the fine craftsmanship and the clear symbols of status also point toward secular power. The trefoil pattern on his robe is a motif found in other contexts associated with high rank, and the elaborate headdress is almost certainly a symbol of office, a crown of sorts that designated his unique position. This has convinced other experts that the statue is a rare depiction of an actual ruler, an administrator or a council elder who governed not through military force, but through organized planning and economic control. In this view, his calm demeanor is not one of meditation, but of calculated authority. The look of a bureaucrat who managed the grain stores, oversaw the standardized brick production, and kept the intricate trade networks flowing. He may have been the human embodiment of the faceless, anonymous authority that planned the perfect grid of the streets and the city-wide drainage system. A third and even more compelling possibility is that this figure is not a human leader at all, but a representation of a deity. The trefoil pattern has been interpreted by some as a symbol of divine energy or a sacred emblem. His transfixing, otherworldly gaze could be that of a god looking out upon his followers. If this is true, then the priest-king statue might be our best clue to the physical appearance of an Indus Valley god, perhaps an early prototype for a figure like the Hindu god Shiva, who is also depicted as a meditative ascetic and lord of animals. This would make the statue not a portrait but an idol meant to be venerated in a shrine. The fact that no such shrines have been conclusively identified only deepens the mystery. Was he kept in a small household altar? Was he part of a larger, now vanished ritual assemblage? The frustrating and beautiful truth is that the priest-king refuses to give up his secrets. He sits in his museum case, a perfect paradox. He is the only clear candidate for an individual ruler we have, yet he possesses none of the grandiose violence associated with kingship elsewhere. He exudes a spiritual aura, yet we have no temples to place him in. He is uniquely detailed, yet he has no name, no inscribed title, and no written story to accompany him. He is a solitary figure of authority in a civilization that otherwise hid its leaders from history. A single, silent sovereign whose true nature remains as composed and inscrutable as his finely carved stone face. This profound disconnect between the Indus Valley and what came next forms one of the most perplexing layers of their mystery. Here was a civilization that had mastered urban planning, standardized weights, and long-distance trade over a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. And yet, when their cities faded away, it appears that nearly all of this sophisticated knowledge vanished with them, leaving a gaping void in the historical record that was filled by a very different culture. The Vedic people, whose Sanskrit hymns compose the Rig Veda and form the bedrock of what would become classical Hindu civilization, seemed to build their world atop a blank slate, with almost no visible inheritance from the advanced urban society that had preceded them by centuries. This lack of clear cultural transmission is a historical puzzle of the highest order. The most obvious place to look for continuity is in the realm of material culture, and here the differences are stark and telling. The Vedic texts describe a pastoral, semi-nomadic society whose wealth was measured in cattle, not crafted goods. Their world was one of portable fire altars, chariot warfare, and oral poetry, a stark contrast to the settled, brick-built urbanism of the Indus Valley. Archaeologically, the contrast is just as dramatic. The precise, cubical stone weights that were the bedrock of the Indus economy are completely absent from early Vedic sites. The beautiful, standardized bricks give way to simpler, mud-based construction. Most strikingly, the entire concept of the planned city, with its gridded streets and sophisticated drainage, disappears entirely. The Vedic peoples lived in temporary settlements and later in fortified mud-walled towns that showed no architectural debt to the grand, baked brick citadels of Harappa or Mohenjo-daro. It is as if a curtain fell on urban life, and when it rose again, the set and the script had been completely changed. This disconnect forces us to ask a difficult question. Was there a complete break? Did the incoming Vedic culture simply replace the old Indus way of life without absorbing any of its elements? For a long time, the now largely discredited Aryan invasion theory argued for exactly this, a violent overthrow that explained the cultural rupture. But most modern scholars see a far more complex and gradual process of migration, interaction, and assimilation. The collapse of the Indus cities was likely a slow-motion unraveling caused by environmental change and economic breakdown, not a sudden military conquest. This means the two peoples, the declining urbanites of the Indus and the incoming pastoralists of the Vedic tradition, likely coexisted and interacted for generations. So why is the evidence of that interaction so faint? The answer may lie in the different values and priorities of the two societies. The Vedic world was intensely focused on the spoken word, on elaborate ritual sacrifices performed in temporary open spaces, and on a social structure organized around lineage and clan. The Indus world, by contrast, seems to have invested its genius in the tangible and the permanent, in brickwork, water management, and commercial organization. When the economic and environmental foundations that supported that urban, material culture crumbled, its most visible achievements became obsolete. A standardized weight system is useless without long-distance trade networks to use it. A city-wide sewer system is a burden to maintain without a centralized authority to manage it. The knowledge of how to build and maintain these systems was likely held by a specialized class of urban administrators and engineers. When the cities were abandoned, that specialized knowledge dependent on a complex urban society simply faded away because the new, more rural and decentralized Vedic society had no use for it. The Vedic culture didn't actively reject Indus technology. It simply existed on a different societal wavelength that didn't require it. Yet, the possibility of a subtler, less tangible continuity remains a tantalizing and hotly debated area. The most compelling potential link is religious. The famous Pashupati seal, depicting a horned figure in a yogic posture surrounded by animals, bears an uncanny resemblance to the later Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as the lord of beasts and the master of yoga. Similarly, the numerous terracotta figurines of women with exaggerated features, often called mother goddess figures, could represent an early form of the Shakti or divine feminine principle so central to later Hinduism. Some scholars also point to the conical stones found at Indus sites, interpreting them as potential phallic lingams, symbols of Shiva. If these connections are valid, they suggest that the spiritual imagination of the Indus people did not die out but was absorbed into the evolving religious traditions of the subcontinent, providing the iconographic and conceptual raw material for what would later become classical Hinduism. The truth likely lies in a complex middle ground. The most visible technological achievements of the Indus civilization, their urban planning, their metrology, their writing, seem to have hit a dead end, collapsing with the civilization that created them. But elements of their deeper spiritual and cultural world may have percolated upward into the new traditions being formed, losing their specific Indus identity in the process. The Vedic culture, with its powerful oral tradition, may have been a sponge, absorbing local beliefs and practices from the descendants of the Indus people who now lived in smaller, integrated communities. The gods and goddesses of the land may have been slowly incorporated into the Vedic pantheon, their original names and stories forgotten but their essence living on. This wouldn't be a clear line of descent, but a messy, gradual process of cultural fusion, where the legacy of the Indus Valley became a silent, foundational layer in the complicated geology of Indian civilization, invisible on the surface but shaping everything that was built above it. Amidst the sprawling ruins of Kalibangan, an Indus Valley site located in present-day Rajasthan, archaeologists made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the field and continues to ignite fierce debate decades later. Here, on the city's raised citadel, they unearthed a series of peculiar, rectangular pits lined with finely fired bricks. Within these pits, they found layers of ash, charcoal, and even remnants of what appeared to be sacrificial offerings, bones, and terracotta cakes. These structures were immediately christened fire altars, and their interpretation has since become a battleground for theories about the very soul of the Indus Valley civilization and its connection to the cultural traditions that followed. The controversy stems from one powerful and unavoidable comparison. In the Vedic tradition that emerges in the Indian subcontinent after the decline of the Indus cities, the fire altar, or Vedi, is the absolute heart of religious practice. The entire Vedic world revolved around the sacred fire, the god Agni, who acted as a messenger between humans and the divine. Elaborate sacrifices, known as yajnas, were performed on precisely constructed brick altars with specific shapes and orientations dictated by meticulous ritual texts. The discovery of what looked like similar altars on an Indus citadel suggested to some a direct cultural link, a thread of continuity stretching from the Indus Valley to the Vedic world and by extension to modern Hinduism. Proponents of this view argue that these altars are the smoking gun, proving that Vedic beliefs were not brought by Chinese letter from afar, but were already present within the Indus culture, perhaps practiced by an early Sanskrit-speaking elite. In this narrative, the Indus people weren't replaced. Their spiritual practices evolved and were codified into the Vedas. However, many archaeologists urge extreme caution, pointing out that the mere presence of a fire feature does not automatically equate to a Vedic ritual. Fire is a universal element, and its use in ritual is one of the most common practices across human cultures worldwide. The altars at Kalibangan and a few other sites like Lothal could just as easily represent a completely indigenous Indus practice, unrelated to anything described in the later Vedic texts. Without any accompanying inscriptions or clear iconography, no statues of Agni or depictions of priests making offerings, we are left to interpret the architecture alone. Perhaps these were not altars for grand animal sacrifices, but simple hearths for domestic offerings to household gods or ancestors. Maybe they were used in industrial processes like metalworking or pottery, though their location on the sacred citadel makes this less likely. The point is, the function is not self-evident. It is projected onto the ruins based on our own knowledge of later history. The debate is further complicated by the sheer diversity of the structures themselves. Unlike the perfectly standardized weights and bricks, these altars are not uniform. They vary in shape, size, and arrangement. At Kalibangan, they appear in groups of 7 in a specific alignment, while at Lothal, a single altar was found associated with a terracotta ladle and a specially designed drain, suggesting libations were poured. This variety could indicate that the practice was not centralized or strictly codified across the civilization, but was instead a local or evolving tradition. If it were a core Vedic-style practice, we might expect to find these altars in every major city, but they are conspicuously absent from the vast ruins of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. This spotty distribution suggests that whatever was happening at these fire pits, it may not have been a universal cornerstone of Indus religion, but rather a specific practice unique to certain communities or time periods. Ultimately, the fire altars stand as a powerful reminder of the dangers and possibilities of archaeological interpretation. They are a Rorschach test in baked brick. What you see in them depends heavily on your broader perspective on Indian history. Those who favor continuity between the Indus and Vedic cultures see a direct prototype for the yajna. Those who see a disjunction between the two worlds see a parallel but separate development. The altars themselves offer no written testimony. They are silent witnesses to ceremonies we can no longer see, holding the ashes of fires that burned over 4,000 years ago. They represent a tantalizing possibility of connection, but until we can read the words of the people who built them, we cannot know if the flames that burned on the citadel of Kalibangan were kindled for a god named Agni, or for a deity whose name is forever lost to time. Given their sprawling trade networks that reached all the way to Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley people clearly possessed the capability to move goods across staggering distances. But how did they achieve this? The most logical answer points to a masterful understanding of the sea. The evidence for their seafaring prowess is both compelling and indirect, painting a picture of a people who were as comfortable on the open ocean as they were on their gridded city streets. The most dramatic proof comes from the distant city of in Mesopotamia, where actual Indus seals have been found, tangible objects that made the journey from the Indus River valley to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Cuneiform tablets from the same region speak of a land called Meluha, a place renowned for its exotic exports of carnelian beads, ebony wood, and ivory. The geographical description and the goods listed make it almost certain that Meluha was the Indus Valley Civilization. For these goods to arrive in Mesopotamia, they had to travel by sea. An overland journey of that distance through mountains and deserts would have been impossibly arduous for bulk trade. This isn't just speculation, it's a fact confirmed by objects found thousands of kilometers from their point of origin. The most convincing architectural evidence for this maritime capability is found at the coastal city of Lothal. Here, archaeologists uncovered a massive, man-made brick structure that is almost universally interpreted as a dockyard. This was not a simple riverbank. It was an engineered basin measuring an impressive 215 meters by 36 meters, with vertical walls and a distinct inlet channel connected to an ancient course of the Sabarmati River. The design suggests a sophisticated understanding of tidal mechanics. A lockable gate system could have allowed the basin to be filled with water at high tide, enabling laden boats to enter. The gate would then be closed, trapping the water and keeping the vessels buoyant at low tide for easy loading and unloading. This wasn't just a place to beach a canoe, it was a specialized, complex port facility that implies a regular and heavy volume of maritime traffic. The presence of warehouses and workshops for bead-making and metallurgy right next to this basin reinforces the idea that Lothal was a major industrial and commercial hub, a gateway between the Indus world and the markets across the Arabian Sea. Yet, for all this compelling evidence, a central and frustrating mystery remains. We have not found a single surviving example of an Indus Valley ship. Not a plank, not a timber, not a single preserved hull. This absence is deafening. We can describe their potential trade routes and even their port infrastructure, but we cannot see the very vessels that made it all possible. This paradox has led to fascinating detective work among archaeologists. Based on their known technological capabilities and some clues from art, experts make educated guesses. They likely built robust wooden plank boats, probably stabilized with a single mast and a woven cotton sail. Depictions on a few seals show vessels with a high prow and stern, sometimes with a cabin or a central mast, designs that look remarkably suited for handling the swells of the open ocean rather than just calm river waters. They may have used coiled ropes and woven mats for sails, and their knowledge of metallurgy would have provided them with strong tools for woodworking and creating anchors. So why have these ships vanished completely? The answer likely lies in the geography and climate of the region. The Indus Valley people built their ports along the shifting, silt-heavy deltas of rivers flowing into the Arabian Sea. These are environments where organic materials like wood decay with incredible speed. Unlike the dry deserts of Egypt that preserved royal barges, or the waterlogged, oxygen-poor soils of northern Europe that saved Viking ships, the conditions around the Indus Delta are terrible for preservation. Any ship that sank or was abandoned would have been quickly consumed by marine organisms, rotted by the humid air, or buried deep under centuries of river silt. Furthermore, their boats were probably built for practicality, not for burial in grand ceremonies. They were valuable assets that were repaired, rebuilt, and ultimately used until they fell apart, their materials recycled until nothing was left to be found by modern archaeologists. This leaves us with a tantalizing gap in our understanding. We can infer their seafaring prowess from the traces they left behind in foreign lands and the sophisticated ports they built at home, but the heart of the operation, the ships themselves, are ghosts. We are left to imagine these vessels, crews of intrepid Indus merchants riding the monsoon winds, navigating by the stars, carrying the unique products of their civilization across the vast, unknown ocean to the distant shores of Mesopotamia. They were the vital link in a globalizing Bronze Age economy, yet their most essential tool has been erased by time, leaving us with only the echoes of their voyages in the artifacts they left behind. Amidst the grand ruins and enigmatic seals, some of the most relatable and human artifacts from the Indus Valley are also among the most debated, the terracotta figurines. These small, fired clay statues, found in their thousands across every major site, offer a charming and intimate glimpse into the daily world of the Indus people. Unlike the formal, idealized art of other ancient cultures, these figures feel spontaneous and personal. We see pudgy bulls with wagging tails, miniature carts with solid wheels, and whimsical monkeys perched on branches. But most of all, we see stout women with elaborate headdresses, men with distinctive hairstyles, and even children with simple toys. Their very ordinariness is what makes them so extraordinary, and their true purpose remains a delightful puzzle that speaks to the heart of this civilization. The most common and instantly recognizable type is the so-called Mother Goddess figurine. These are almost always female, with elaborate, fan-shaped headdresses that resemble a crown, heavy hip girdles, and prominently emphasized breasts and genitalia. The natural assumption, and the one that gives them their name, is that these were objects of veneration, representing a powerful deity of fertility, childbirth, and the protection of the home. In this interpretation, they would have been placed in small household shrines, where families would offer prayers for healthy children, bountiful harvests, and the continued well-being of the community. The exaggerated feminine features are seen not as crude realism, but as powerful symbols of the life-giving and nurturing forces of nature, a concept that appears in nearly every agricultural society throughout history. However, not every scholar is convinced that every curvaceous terracotta figure was a goddess. An equally compelling argument suggests that many of these figurines could have been something far more mundane, ancient fashion dolls or educational tools. Their detailed hairstyles, jewelry, and intricate headdresses could represent the latest styles of the time, making them three-dimensional catalogs for women to consult. Or they might have been used to teach young girls about adulthood, motherhood, and the social roles they were expected to assume. In this view, they are not sacred icons but didactic objects, reflecting the social and cultural norms of Indus society. This doesn't strip them of importance, it simply grounds them in the everyday rhythms of life, making them a testament to the cultural transmission of identity from one generation to the next. This debate between the sacred and the secular is further complicated by the sheer variety of other forms. The animal figurines are a menagerie of the Indus world. There are humped bulls so carefully modeled that you can almost hear them lowing, and perplexing unicorns that mirror the mythical beast on the seals. There are elephants, rhinoceroses, and even squirrels, all crafted with a keen observational eye. Were these religious votives offerings to a lord of animals? Or were they simply toys crafted by a parent to bring a moment of joy to a child? The discovery of small terracotta carts, complete with solid wheels and a place for a draft animal to be attached, pushes this question even further. Could these have been ritual objects, perhaps used in a procession to symbolize the journey of a deity? Or are we looking at the Bronze Age equivalent of a toy truck, a cherished plaything that sparked the imagination of a child 4,000 years ago? Perhaps the most satisfying answer is that these figurines held a fluid meaning, their purpose changing with context. The same bull figurine could be a sacred object when placed on a makeshift altar in the home, a teaching tool when used by a parent to explain the importance of cattle to their livelihood, and a beloved toy when clutched in the hands of a child at play. This multifaceted interpretation reflects the complexity of the Indus Valley people, themselves a society that seamlessly blended the practical and the spiritual, the communal and the domestic. They did not compartmentalize their world into strictly separate boxes of sacred and profane. Instead, their beliefs and their daily lives were deeply intertwined, and the humble terracotta figurine, in all its varied forms, was a physical expression of that beautiful, holistic worldview. They are small, silent sculptures that hold within their fired clay a universe of meaning, from the deepest hopes for divine favor to the simple, universal love of a parent for a child. The sheer scale of the Indus Valley Civilization, spanning over 1,000,000 square kilometers, presents us with one of its most fundamental and puzzling questions. How was this vast territory actually governed? At the heart of this mystery lies the curious relationship between its two greatest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Separated by over 600 kilometers of river plains and desert, these two urban giants show a level of architectural and cultural similarity that is nothing short of astonishing. They shared the same standardized brick sizes, the same city layout with a raised citadel and a lower town, and the same advanced drainage systems. Their artisans produced identical seals, beads, and pottery styles. This incredible uniformity suggests a shared blueprint, a common cultural language that speaks of deep connection. So, does this mean they were the twin capitals of a vast, unified empire administered by a powerful central authority? Or were they independent peer city-states, the New York and London of their day, who simply agreed on a set of common standards because it was good for business? The evidence, as always, pulls us in both directions. The argument for a unified state with twin capitals is compelling. The most powerful piece of evidence is that remarkable standardization. The consistent brick ratio of 4:2:1 across the entire civilization isn't something that happens by accident. It implies a strong, central authority capable of issuing and enforcing building codes. The same goes for the system of weights. A merchant in Harappa used a set of stone cubes that were perfectly identical to those used by a trader in Mohenjo-daro, and even by someone in the distant coastal city of Lothal. This kind of precise, decimal-based metrology doesn't develop organically across independent states. It suggests a centralized system of weights and measures, perhaps even with official inspectors sent out to ensure compliance. Furthermore, the absence of obvious royal palaces in either city could be explained by a unique form of governance. Instead of a single, all-powerful pharaoh, power may have been shared between a ruling council or a class of administrators who moved between these two great capitals, governing the empire from both its northern and southern hubs. In this view, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were the administrative hearts of a single, massive political entity. Yet, the case for independent city-states is equally persuasive. If this was a unified empire, where is the evidence of its central administration? We have no grand royal road connecting the two cities, no evidence of a centralized messaging system for rapid communication, and no surviving records of imperial decrees or tax collection. The script itself, though uniform, appears mostly on small seals used for local trade and identification, not on grand stelae proclaiming the laws of a mighty emperor. The vast distance between the two centers also poses a significant logistical challenge. Governing such a sprawling territory from 2 points without the use of horses or swift transportation would have been a monumental, if not impossible, task for a Bronze Age bureaucracy. This has led many scholars to propose a different model, a network of powerful, independent city-states bound together not by political allegiance but by a shared economic and cultural system. In this scenario, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were not twin capitals, but were instead the dominant nodes in a vast interaction sphere. They were like powerful merchant republics, each controlling its own hinterland but subscribing to a common set of standards because it facilitated incredibly profitable long-distance trade. Their shared culture wasn't enforced from the top down. It was adopted voluntarily because it worked. Perhaps the most likely answer lies not in choosing one theory over the other, but in finding a middle path that acknowledges the unique nature of Indus political organization. This may not have been a centralized empire in the Mesopotamian or Egyptian mold, nor was it a collection of completely independent and competing states. Instead, it might represent a third, rarely seen type of early political complexity, a cultural commonwealth or a confederacy of elites. The rulers of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and other major centers like Dolavira and Rakhigahi may have been part of a shared ideological community. They might have exchanged marriage partners, met for grand ritual festivals, and agreed upon common standards and conventions to ensure economic stability and social harmony across the region. Their power was not expressed through military conquest and monuments to themselves, but through their ability to participate in and uphold this shared system. The citadels in each city, then, were not military forts but the symbolic centers of this distributed power, places where local elites demonstrated their membership in this vast interregional network by building in the accepted style and following the established codes. This would explain the uniformity without requiring a single, overpowering central government. It paints a picture of a civilization that found a way to achieve remarkable cultural cohesion across a continent-sized area through consensus and shared economic interest, a fragile and brilliant experiment in large-scale cooperation that ultimately could not withstand the environmental and social pressures that led to its decline. And so, after exploring these 25 puzzles, what are we left with? Not a simple story of kings and conquests, but a far more compelling and enigmatic portrait. The Indus Valley Civilization emerges as a profound paradox, a society of immense scale and stunning uniformity that somehow operated without the obvious trappings of power we've come to expect from the ancient world. They built meticulously planned megacities but left no grand palaces. They mastered trade across oceans but left no boastful accounts of their voyages. They created a complex script that covered thousands of objects, yet we cannot read a single word. They engineered the world's most advanced water systems but seem to have lacked the massive temples and dramatic royal tombs that define their contemporaries. This is what makes them so endlessly fascinating. They defy our standard historical categories at every turn. Collectively, these mysteries force us to reconsider the very definition of a civilization. We often equate complexity with hierarchy and power with self-glorification. The Indus Valley people present a radical alternative. Their greatest monument was not a pyramid pointing to the heavens, but a sewer running beneath the streets. Their most powerful symbol of authority might not have been a scepter, but a set of perfectly standardized stone weights. They seem to have invested their collective genius not in celebrating individual rulers, but in fostering a remarkably high quality of public life for their citizens. This makes them feel unexpectedly modern, yet simultaneously more distant. They were arguably history's first large-scale experiment in pragmatic, collective urban living, and their silence on matters of ego and empire is a thunderous absence that continues to challenge archaeologists. This is why the Indus Valley remains one of archaeology's greatest and most important puzzles. It isn't a single unsolved riddle, but a complete cultural cipher. Every answer we think we have only leads to deeper, more complex questions. The discovery of their cities in the 19th century was just the beginning. Each subsequent dig has added new layers of mystery rather than providing final clarity. They are a constant reminder of how much of the human story is still buried, waiting to be found, and how entire chapters of our past can be written in a language we no longer understand. Their legacy is a beautiful, frustrating, and humbling lesson in the limits of our knowledge. Now we want to hear from you. After this journey through their lost world, which of these 25 mysteries captures your imagination the most? Is it the silent, undeciphered script that holds the key to their voices, the purpose of the serene and inscrutable priest-king, the startling absence of any evidence for war? Or perhaps the haunting figure of the dancing girl, whose confident gaze has endured for 4,000 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation about this incredible civilization going.